Well, hello and welcome to Sunday Morning Coffee with Dr. Childress here. So today I want to uh, be talking about diagnosing factitious disorder, the diagnosing of an absence of a cause. Uh, the pathology in the family courts is a shared persecutory delusion and false factitious attachment pathology being imposed on the child by the pathogenic parenting of a narcissistic borderline dark personality parent. So we have two um, diagnoses, relevant diagnoses, but they are intertwined and connected. The shared persecutory delusion, that's a thought disorder, fixed and false belief in being victimized, and the factitious disorder, the false attachment pathology, which is getting the primary focus is the attachment pathology. The child rejecting a parent is an attachment pathology. So that's what's getting everybody's attention and focus, with the implication that the severity, because of the severity of the attachment pathology, a child rejecting a parent, there's the implication of child abuse parenting by the targeted parent, and so child protection concerns get activated for everybody. However, it's a false attachment pathology. It's a factitious disorder imposed on another. And uh, because of that, everybody's responding to what appears to be an authentic or appears to be an attachment pathology. And they're not considering and not diagnosing, not identifying the actual cause, which is a factitious disorder being imposed on the child by a pathological parent. So, diagnosing a factitious disorder is unusual in professional psychology because it's the only disorder that is not there. Diagnosing a factitious disorder is diagnosing the absence of a cause, the absence of a pathology that can cause the child's symptoms. Whereas diagnosing all other pathology, ADHD, depression, anxiety, eating disorders, everything else, we're diagnosing the cause of the symptoms, and action. There's an actual cause. For a factitious disorder, however, that's not true. There is no cause for the symptoms. It's a false disorder. And so it's a different way of diagnosing, because it's a diagnosis by rule out. You have to rule out all the other causes, the potential causes of everything, in order to then get to the fact that there is no cause, and these are false symptoms being generated by a pathological parent. Now, for medical uh, factitious disorder imposed on another, that classically called Munchausen by proxy, for a medical factitious disorder, I've worked at children's hospitals. That's where it shows up typically, because no one in the community can diagnose the pathology. Oftentimes, it has to do with feeding issues. Allergies come up a lot. And the parent is very concerned about allergies, and the child is developing all these odd symptoms. And there's a lot of testing that goes on out in the community, doctors trying to figure out what's causing the child's symptoms, but nobody can figure it out. It's not, the symptoms are not matching to any pattern of any pathology that we know of that would cause those symptoms. And so it keeps getting referred from doctor to doctor as they keep trying different hypotheses and doing different tests and things. And eventually it winds up at like a children's hospital, which is kind of your top tier medical facility for children. And when it comes in, there's a huge chart. The medical record is just huge, but there's no cause for anything. And that's the first tip off that we might be dealing with a factitious disorder. And if the physician becomes suspicious, they call down to the psych department and get one of the pediatric psychologists like me to come up and make the diagnosis of a factitious disorder. But the making of that diagnosis is in close collaboration with the physicians having ruled out all the possible medical causes. And so the first rule out is the possible real pathologies. But if there's no real pathology, then it can account for it. We then look to the factitious disorder as the explanation. So the pathology in the family courts is a false or factitious attachment pathology being imposed on the child by the pathogenic parenting of a pathological parent. I'll describe how they accomplish that in a little bit. So if you Google factitious, it means artificially created or developed. Yes, that's exactly what's going on. We have an artificially created attachment pathology. So it's a factitious disorder. We are then diagnosing the absence of a cause for the child's symptoms, which is different than how we approach every other type of pathology, where we're trying to look for an authentic cause because there is an authentic cause. In this case, there isn't. So we're diagnosing the absence of a cause. Now, to diagnose a false attachment pathology requires professional level understanding for what real attachment pathology looks like. And that's critical to understand regarding boundaries of competence. So it is a persecutory delusion. So the mental health professional must be competent in the diagnostic assessment, in the identification of delusional thought disorders. And it's a false or factitious attachment pathology that's being created. So the mental health professional must be professionally knowledgeable about what real attachment pathology looks like, because you're going to be doing a comparison and saying this is not a real attachment pathology. But in order to do that, you have to understand real attachment pathology. And I run into this every time, every single time, is that the mental health people who are involved do not know about attachment. They don't know about the attachment system. They don't know about attachment pathology. Typically, that knowledge comes from early childhood. That's the zone of attachment. And if we see an attachment pathology, we typically see it by age 5. We don't see attachment pathology suddenly springing up at age 7 or 8 or 9 that has no history prior to that. So that's one of the first indications that we have a false attachment pathology, is that we have a stable attachment relationship prior to the divorce, but then all of a sudden with the divorce, a child develops a serious attachment pathology. That doesn't happen. That's not the way the attachment system works. That's not credible. But you have to understand the real attachment system to understand why that's not credible. But they don't. And because they don't, they assume that children reject their parents and this happens. And no, that doesn't actually happen. But we'll get into that. But it is critical. So the two most important competence issues here are the persecutory delusion. You must be competent in the diagnostic assessment of delusional thought disorders, and you must be competent in the normal scope of attachment pathology, the attachment system, what it is, how it functions. You have to know pretty much everything about the attachment networks and what happens with attachment pathology. It creates insecure attachment, 3 types of insecure attachment. It doesn't create a child seeking to sever the parent-child bond. Now, people will say, what about child abuse? Maybe, okay? Maybe on child abuse, you'll get a child motivated to sever the parent-child bond, but then you'll have clear indications of child abuse by the targeted parent, and you'll want to diagnose that and put that on a treatment plan and fix it, and then restore the child's attachment bond with the formerly abusive parent. That's what we do. So if we have authentic child abuse, then let's diagnose that. If there's no child abuse, and remember, this is a diagnosis by rule out. If there's no child abuse by the targeted parent, then there is no cause for the severity of the child's attachment pathology. And so I'll talk about that in a second. But to understand the attachment system. This is critical. These are foundational pieces of what the attachment system is. And it's important for everyone to understand this about the love and bonding system of the brain. It developed through millions of years of evolution regarding the selective predation of children. Predators are seeking children. And so when the predators coming into a human social group, they're not looking at the adults, they're looking at the kid. That's the food. And they're going to try to separate, they're going to rush in and try to separate the child from the parent. And if they can separate the child from the parent, that child is food. And so, over millions of years of evolution across species, so baby zebra gets close to mommy zebra when the lions are near. That's the attachment system, and it's an attachment system in primates as predators or primates as a monkey critters we are. And so, over the course of time, a very strong and powerful motivational system developed in children to bond to the parent to get parental protection from predators. And so, if a child who rejects a parent is eaten by predators or dies of starvation or exposure, gets separated from the group. There's so many ways a child can die without parental care that the motivation system is very strong to bond to the parent. And that's why it's called a goal corrected motivational system. It always maintains the goal of forming a secure attachment bond to the parent. It never, the attachment system never seeks to sever the parent child bond because that's death for the child. Any brain cells, any brain connections that would motivate the child to sever a parent child bond resulted in the death of the child. So those genes for those brain networks were selectively removed from the gene pool. It's not part of a child's motivation to reject a parent. They will always try to seek a bond to the parent, even abusive parents. In fact, especially abusive parents. If you know anything about the attachment system, a problematic parent more fully exposes the child to the predators. And so when you have a bad parent, if you say, "You're a bad parent, I'm rejecting you," you're dead. You're getting eaten by a predator and your genes are removed from the gene pool. If, however, as a child, you have a bad parent and you more strongly are motivated to bond to that, perhaps you can get that bad parent to protect you. And then you would survive and those genes get passed on. So the way the attachment system responds to bad parenting is by more strongly motivating the child to bond to that parent. That's called an insecure attachment. And we have three patterns identified in the research regarding insecure attachment to problematic parenting: insecure ambivalent, insecure avoidant, and insecure disorganized. But this attachment pathology in the family courts matches none of those patterns. Okay, the avoidant child is low protest. They just get along with everybody. Here we got a child who's high protest. The ambivalent system is high protest to elicit the involvement of the parent. Get the parent over because that's a bad parent. They're not paying attention to me. So I'll create protest behavior, get that parent's involvement. And now the predator will pass me by because my parent's attending to me. So protest behavior is designed to elicit the involvement of the parent. But here we have protest behavior designed to sever, get rid of the parent. That doesn't happen. And insecure, disorganized, yeah, that's basically what we got. We got the child towards a targeted parent has no organized strategy to develop a secure attachment. Well, we know what type of parenting produces disorganized attachment. It's psychotic range parenting or a parent who is both simultaneously a source of nurture and danger. So that would be the abusive parent. So if we got a child rejecting a parent, the first rule out becomes child abuse by the targeted parent. However, if we rule out child abuse by the targeted parent, then there's only one other possible cause, which is the child's psychological abuse. It's a false or a factitious attachment pathology being imposed on the child because the child's symptoms do not match the possible causes in that situation. So, another important thing to understand about the attachment system is the importance of repair from Tronick and Gold. So Ed Tronick is probably the most knowledgeable attachment expert currently out there. 40 years of study on the still face looking at the attachment system. And what he notes in his book, Power of Discord with Gold, is that the research revealed that messiness holds the key to strong relationships. Let that sink in. Messiness holds the key. So we're not looking for like wonderful matches and attunement. No, actually, conflict is, and what the power of discord is actually a good thing. In typical healthy parent infant pairs, on average, 70% of the interactions were out of sync. There was discord and conflict in 70% of the parent child interactions, of healthy interactions. So it says, does this seem right to you that most relationships are mismatched 70% of the time? Now, note this. We found this again and again. In the field of developmental psychology, this 70-30 split has become famous. Now, I'm going to stop at that point right there. Does anybody in the family courts, all you mental health people in the family courts, are you familiar with this 70-30 split in the research? That 70% of parent-child relationships involve a breach in the relationship, a discord, mismatch in the relationship. 70% of healthy relationships involve that. Are you aware of that? Because it's famous. But these people are just ignorant of developmental psychology, of attachment, of anything they need to know. It's 70-30 split has become famous, with some practitioners referencing it without actually knowing its origin. I got no practitioners referencing it in the family courts. Holy cow. In analyzing these videotapes, we discovered that the most important part was not the mismatch, but the repair. And oh my goodness, this goes all the way back to Margaret Mahler, a psychologist in the 1930s, studying children and the individuation process of individuation relative to the 2-year-olds. And what she discovered on the separation and individuation is that it's not the breach in the relationship. It's not when the child says no and creates all the conflict. That's not where damage happens. Damage happens in the failure to repair. That's where all the bad stuff takes place, not in the front end. We can have like a lot of conflict, let's say in a cultural family. Let's pick an Italian family or a Mexican American or Irish family, somebody. There can be a lot of conflict, and a Greek family, very emotional and yelling at each other. However, that's not necessarily damaging to the relationships or unhealthy as long as they repair. And so these cultures that are more flamboyant or emotional also have the capacity to repair those relationships, whereas other cultures like my Northern European culture, we have less ability sometimes to repair. And so we don't get as flamboyantly emotional or get into the conflict that maybe some other cultures might be able to tolerate, because it's all about the repair. That's where the healthy or unhealthy stuff takes place, a failure to repair. So let's talk about how the pathological, narcissistic, borderline, dark personality parent creates the false attachment pathology. And it's really, really easy. And it's basically they are manipulating the court by creating the false pathology. And that's the factitious disorder imposed on another. It's imposed on the child for secondary gain. That's what it's called, secondary gain to the pathological parent of getting what they want. It's reinforcing they're creating pathology in the child. It's a way of getting what they want. It could be attention, it could be financial gains, like fraud or something. So they create a false pathology for money. It could be to meet their own pathological needs inside. But there's a secondary gain that is involved with creating false pathology. And in this case, the secondary gain is clear. It's to manipulate the court's decisions on child custody. And holy cow, the dark personalities are Machiavellian levels of manipulation. That's part of their constellation. Dark triad is narcissistic, psychopathic, and Machiavellian levels of manipulation. The vulnerable dark triad is vulnerable narcissism, borderline, and Machiavellian manipulation. And then you add sadism to get the dark triad, the dark tetrad. And borderline narcissistic personalities are highly manipulative. So we're talking about the most manipulative people on the planet here. And making false allegations and creating of abuse and creating a child attachment pathology, false attachment pathology, that's a perfect way to manipulate the court, because everybody then starts to respond to the potential of the targeted parent being abusive. So one of the things we know in psychology, just established fact, out of BF Skinner and everybody, is that if we reward a behavior, it increases the probability of that behavior. That's just basic, psychology. If you reward something, you're going to see it more often. And making false allegations of child abuse in the family courts, directly or indirectly, either you overtly make the allegation or you subtly imply the allegation, is rewarded in the family courts with a granting of child custody. Because in the family courts, the moment there's concern around possible child abuse, and you get that the moment the child says, I don't want to be with the targeted parent, then everybody says, oh, there some problem with the targeted parent? And so everybody's focused. That's your indirect allegation of some sort of abusive parenting by the targeted parent. So now everybody goes into a child protection response, and oftentimes will give the custody over to the pathological parent pending the outcome of the investigation. So right away, boom, the false allegations nullify the court's authority. The court, whatever the court orders are, they get nullified by the potential of the child abuse. And so the court backs off and says, well, until we get the investigation back on the child abuse issues, then let's stay. The child obviously is fine with the pathological parent, so we'll just leave the child over there. And if you're good at the manipulation, you can actually get the targeted parent on supervised visitation, which is creating the pathology in the child. And so the making false allegations is an excellent way of manipulating the court and getting the custody of the child. The the pathological narcissistic borderline dark personality parent is rewarded with child custody irrespective of the courts. So it doesn't they just the courts are irrelevant in this situation once the parent uses the false allegations and induced attachment pathology in the child. So it's not just the false allegations. The false allegations are being made by the child's symptoms, by the false attachment pathology that everybody's responding to. Because if it's a real attachment pathology, then we're potentially in child abuse range parenting by the targeted parent. And so, because it's rewarded, you're going to see it all the time in the family courts. And so, until the family courts get a handle on this, you're basically rewarding the pathological parent for creating pathology in the child. That's not a good thing to do. And what we do, from my approach of applied knowledge, attachment based model for the pathology, we diagnose the pathology early and get a handle on it. And because it's a diagnosis by rule out, so we rule out the false allegations. We rule out the persecutory delusion, and we identify the persecutory delusion. And the moment we identify the targeted parent as normal range, that cannot produce the severity of the child's attachment pathology. So then we move to the differential diagnosis and we take a look at that situation and we diagnose the child abuse by the allied pathological parent. Now, once we balance our diagnostic assessment, then if they make a false allegation in an attempt at manipulation and it doesn't work, which it shouldn't, we get a good diagnosis on it, it doesn't work. It may work for a little bit of time as everybody pays attention, but as soon as we realize it's a false pathology, the false attachment pathology in the child, this is a normal range parent, the targeted parent, then the moment we realize that, the diagnosis shifts over and becomes child psychological abuse by the allied parent. We protectively separate the child. We identify the child abuse by the allied parent. Now, making those false allegations becomes a double edged sword that we have ceased to reward it and by giving child custody. It gets a little bit of advantage early on, but then once we identify it, no, it doesn't. And so that's how we handle it. There's two litigants, there's two differential diagnoses. Both of those need to be fully and adequately assessed in the situation. So, making in the family courts currently, making false allegations of child abuse, either directly or indirectly, works. And so there will be no solution to the family court conflicts and custody conflicts in the family courts until we change that, until we stop rewarding parents for making false allegations by creating pathology in their child. It doesn't necessarily need to be the false allegation to the CPS. The allegation comes from the child's factitious attachment pathology. That's what makes the allegation, because the only thing that produces that is possible child abuse. So, what you do is to create the pathology as the pathological parent. Is all you have to do is create sides and then force the child to choose a side in the spousal conflict. And if you do that, that works. Just create sides, mom side, dad side. You create a lot of conflict, put the child right in the middle, and force the child to choose a side. And that is the way you get full custody, because the child will choose your side. And I'll explain why. And so you will be given full custody of the child if you just create sides and then create conflict. And that's the way the family courts work right now. Okay. So if you want to stop the custody conflict in the family courts, you have to change this feature of the family courts, that you're rewarding parents for creating conflict, putting the child in the middle, and forcing the child to choose sides. Stop doing that. Okay. You have to get a handle on what the pathology is, accurately diagnose it, so you can come up with an effective treatment plan. So here's how you do it. If you want to create a false attachment pathology in the child, here are the 4 steps to do it. First is you create sides. And so mom's side and dad's side. Second is you enter the protective parent role. So that means you create the protective parent narrative around your parenting, that you're concerned, you're the protective parent. Third step is you just create conflict about everything and put the child in the middle. So it's just conflict about the child being in the middle. And then the fourth step is to create the victimized child narrative in the child. And the moment you get the child to adopt the victimized child narrative, that automatically sets everything into play. So, how do you create sides? Well, you create sides by creating conflict about everything. Okay, so what school the child goes to, how the child's treated at the targeted parent's house, what activities the child attends, just everything. Just create conflict around the child all the time, um, and put the child right in the middle. Then you join with the child's side against the other parent by supporting the child's elicited criticisms of the other parent. So if you just stay, you put the child in the middle and all this conflict, and then when the child's with you, you just question the child from this place of concern about the child's well-being with the other parent, and you're looking for criticism of the other parent. The moment the child offers any criticism of the other parent, you then join with the child's side against the other parent. That creates the loyalty conflict where you present as a victim of the other parent. So dad is abusing me, or mom is, abusive. She's a, crazy woman, or dad's, this mean, angry human. So you play the role of the victim, and then you seduce the child into also being the same victim. You elicit a criticism, and then you go, "Oh, you poor thing," and create an us versus them. That's your side. And so you present um, as a victim of the other parent. And when the child is over with the other parent, present as sad and or irritable when the child expresses anything good about the other parent. So you're drawing the child's nurture to your sadness, but also punishing away the child's bond to the other parent. They realize that that's going to get them a dark, uh, uncomfortable parent. So the way you become the protective parent is by eliciting the child's criticisms and then moving to support the child. So everybody says, don't talk bad about the other parent. That's not how it's created. Okay. It's created much more manipulatively. They elicit the child criticism from the child, then support the child's criticism, and it looks to all the world as if they're just being a protective, supportive parent. No, they're not. They're generating the false belief that the child is being victimized. So here you can see how the persecutory delusion is being generated. And so with these two, the factitious disorder and the persecutory delusion, are blended together. And so that's where you can begin to identify the false pathology, because not only will you see a failure or an absence of authentic causes, the targeted parent's a normal range parent, that not to the level of producing the severe attachment rejection that we got from the child. In addition, though, the way this is created, the false, is through the persecutory delusion, getting the child to believe the child is being victimized. And so that's you can identify both aspects of that going in to making up the child's factitious pathology. So you adopt the protected parent role, that you listen to criticism, and then I'm concerned about you, and oh, you poor thing of getting, you maltreated over at the other parent's house. Then display anxiety at separation. The attachment system is exquisitely sensitive to parental anxiety because it was formed in predation. And so, if you have a predator out there and the child's wandering around, or if you have a protective parent and the child's wandering around, and the parent sees a predator and goes, and becomes anxious, the child immediately goes, what's going on? And gets close to that parent for protection. So the child's attachment networks are exquisitely sensitive to registering parental signals of anxiety, which might be a predator. So what the allied parent, all they have to do is signal anxiety about the child being with the other parent. So they can do it at transfers. That's often where it happens. The parent gets very anxious. The child starts to cry, and the parent's nurturing the child and about, separating, as though going over to the other parent was a bad thing. The parent's signaling all sorts of anxiety. Those are called retrieval behaviors. And in doing that, when the parent signals anxiety, they're communicating to the child there's a predator out there. Well, who's the predator? The parents identifying the other parent is the predator. That's what's causing my anxiety, is you're not safe with the other parent. And so the child goes, well, I'm not safe with the other parent. Oh my goodness, they're not actually my parent, they're a predator. And that's what helps suppress the child's attachment bonding. Not entirely, it's still going on the different channels, but you get a suppression on it because the pathological parent has now defined the um, targeted parent as being a predator rather than a protective, nurturing parent for the child. And so display anxiety at separations. And when the child comes back, question the child if they're okay. That's how you show anxiety. Are you okay? Were you taken care of? Was everything okay? You're signaling anxiety to the child that there's something of danger over with the other parent. But to all the world, you look like the protective parent. So you're creating all these false roles and then provide nurture for the child's criticisms. And so you elicit the criticisms through motivated questioning, directive questioning. How are things over at dad's house? How are things when you're with your mom? Until you get some kind of criticism. The moment the child offers a criticism, you come in and show sympathetic understanding for the, oh, you poor thing that you were, and you create that us versus them against the abusive other spouse and parent, and you create this false belief in the child that they are being somehow victimized by the other parent. There's your persecutory delusion, a fixed and false belief that the child is being malevolently treated in some way by the other parent. So you can see it forming up in this creation of the false attachment pathology. So then, how do you create conflict? Oh, that's easy. You just be uncooperative. You just create conflict about everything, and make it about the child. It's always put the child in the middle. And when you put the child in the middle, you groom and seduce the child on the side things. And once you have comfort that the child is on your side, then you put the child out front and you say, the child wants to go to private school, and this private school over here. Now, if the allied parent says, no, they don't, they don't care, they want to go to public school, or this is better for them, you say, no, see, the child is saying, I want to go to a private school. And you say, see, so you should listen to the child. And if the targeted parent says, no, 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 we should be making this decision as adults, they say, oh, you're not being sensitive what the child wants. You're not listening to the child. Oh, you poor thing. Your mom, your dad doesn't listen to you. They don't support you. I understand that you want to go to private school. They don't do it. So you create the child's side, you create the child's expression to be on your side, and then you use the child to manipulate all the situations. Whatever you want, you just get the child to say, that's what I want. And then you say, well, we need to listen to the child. Incredibly manipulative. Narcissistic, borderline dark personalities expect manipulation. So that's your role reversal. It's a socioclinical sign of putting the kid out front. It's the child who wants, it's the child who wants us. It's the child. All about decisions that should be adult decisions. And if the targeted parent challenges that process, a manipulative process of using the child as your like human shield, then they are characterized as being insensitive to the child. And so it's just incredibly manipulative. Um, so then the other feature is not only do you generate the conflict, you continue the conflict. And you just continue it and you continue sides until the child eventually collapses and to your side. And the child will collapse to your side. Because if you create sides and then create conflict and put the child right in the middle of the conflict on the two sides, that's just so stressful to the child. And the child's going to have to choose sides. If they try to maintain neutrality, then they're going to be in the middle of the conflict because you're putting them in the middle. So that's not going to solve anything for them. If they bond to the targeted parent, you're just going to create conflict and keep them in the middle. So that's not going to get them out of the middle. The only way they can get out of the middle of the conflict is by joining your side. The moment they join your side, we kick the other parent away, and now the child's had to sacrifice a parent in order for the conflict to end, but at least they're no longer in the middle. And so that's how you manipulate the child onto your side. A number of ways. You present as a protective parent, you convince a child they're being victimized, but it's easy peasy if you just create conflict, put the child in the middle, and just wait. And eventually the child will collapse onto your side in doing that. So, step four, though, is it's a critical feature of this. It's where everything clicks into gear, is creating the victimized child narrative. Because the moment you create a victimized child, the child believes that they're being somehow victimized, malevolently treated by the targeted parent, then that automatically defines the other two roles. The moment you create a victimized child, that automatically defines the targeted parent as being abusive, right? Because you can't have a victimized child without an abusive parent. And so the child saying, I don't want to be with that. So that defines that parent as being in the abusive parent role. And then the a live parent is signaling, "Oh, I'm the protective parent. I'm worried about you with the other parent, and I'm really, monitoring you and fussing over you. Are you okay with the other?" I'm clearly want to adopt the protective parent role, the all wonderful protective parent role, and so between the two of those, um everything's kind of, the moment that the child adopts a victimized child role, that automatically defines the other two roles involved in the situation. But the child is not being victimized. It's a false pathology, a factitious attachment pathology being imposed on the child by the manipulations of an extremely pathological narcissistic borderline dark personality parent. So the child is not being victimized, but the child is, you create the belief in the child that they are being victimized. There's your persecutory delusion. And the moment you create that, now the child's going to display their factitious attachment pathology. So you elicit criticism from the child of the other parent through motivated and directive questioning, and express concern. Are you okay? Are you okay? Because you're always presenting as a protective parent role on this. Then, when the child offers a criticism, show great interest, become animated, and become full into your protective. Oh, you poor thing, and oh, this is so difficult for you. I'm so sorry you have to go over and deal with that other parent, and you show all sorts of nurturing emotions whenever the child responds to your motivated and directive questioning with criticism of the other parent. If the child does not respond with a criticism, then become disappointed and enter a dark kind of mood of displeasure. If you do that, you show animated nurture whenever the child criticizes them, and you go dark and sad when they don't, the child's real quickly going to realize that the thing to do for mom or pathological dad is to give him a criticism. And so he comes home from visitation. It was kind of boring over there. Oh, you poor thing, and so they begin to create this false narrative of the child being malevolently treated in some way. And so that's how you create the victimized child role. You attune to criticisms anytime. And attunement is like, if you think of a wave, like a function or a wave going up, if you get two waves and they're both on the same sequence, then that amplifies them. That amplifies the up and amplifies the down. If they're opposite sequences, then they suppress each other, they dampen each other. So that's attunement, which is being on the same wavelength, or misattunement, which is being opposite on things. So when the child is um, critical of the other parent, you attune to those and you go, oh my goodness, and you poor thing. When the child expresses anything positive or even goes to be with the parent without expressing negative, if the child doesn't protest enough about being with the other parent, then you misattune with that and you go into your dark place and communicate to the child they're not doing what you want them to do. Oh, yes, criticizing the other parent, protesting, I don't want to be with them, mom. Well, yeah, I can totally understand that. But you have to go. And then they say, well, I tell the child to go, but they don't go. What can I do? That's the role reversal, putting the child out in front. And now you got plausible deniability on that. You can say, yeah, I tell the child to go. It's the child's own decision to not to be with the targeted parent because they're so abusive of the child, and everybody focuses over there on the abuse. And now you get custody of the child and you keep that parent in the abusive role defending themselves. Then you just delay, delay, delay. You put it into the court system and you just delay, delay. You can get 2, 3 years out of this before ever anybody starts to suspect that you're causing this and it's not the targeted parent. And by 3 years, you've got that pathology just totally entrenched in the child. So it's absolutely manipulative, creating this false factitious attachment pathology imposed on the child. Let's talk about psychological control. People use parental alienation. Stop using that term. There's no such thing as that. They use psychological control. There's lots of research about psychological control. So here's from Sorens and Van Venstinsky. Sorry for the mispronunciation. Um, Psychological control can be expressed through a variety of parental tactics, including guilt induction, which refers to the use of guilt inducing strategies to pressure children to comply with parental requests, contingent love and the withdrawal or love withdrawal, very common, where parents make their attention, interest, care, and love contingent upon the children's attainment of parental standards, instilling anxiety, which refers to induction of anxiety to make children comply with parental requests, and invalidation of the child's perspective, which pertains to parental constraining of the child's spontaneous expressions of thoughts and feelings. So we know this in the research literature. This is not Dr. Childress making this stuff up. This is applying the established knowledge to the situation. We know we got narcissistic borderline dark personalities. We know they're roughly about 10% of the population. We know that about roughly 10% of divorces end in high conflict custody disputes in the family courts. I wonder why. We know we got psychological control of children. We know we got a factitious disorder. We know we got persecutory delusions. These are all real things, and they are all occurring in the family courts, and none of them are being diagnosed, and instead they are all being rewarded. So when the pathological parent creates the severe attachment pathology in the child, destroys the child's attachment networks, going to destroy the child's healthy development in life, the family courts and the mental health people in the family courts are rewarding the creation of false pathology by giving the child to the pathological parent. It works. Creating a factitious disorder imposed on another, creating Munchausen by proxy, works in the family courts. Okay. Now, for FDIA, factitious disorder imposed on another, with the medical disorders, nobody expects a parent to be producing a medical disorder in their child. Okay, so that's unexpected. It's unexpected the parents creating any pathology in their child ever, but it's unexpected that they would be creating medical disorders, and it's relatively rare. And so most of the community doctors will act as though it's a real pathology. And it's only later when we've ruled out everything else over 5, 6, 7 years of having this child tested for various allergies or various medical issues, and nothing's coming back. There's no explanation that begin to tips us off about a factitious disorder for secondary gain for the manipulation side of things. But in the family courts, we should anticipate that right off the top. Okay, that's our differential diagnosis, is a factitious disorder imposed on another. So when there's child abuse, when there's or custody conflict where the child's got attachment pathology and we're worried about child abuse by the targeted parent, that's our first rule out, is the child abuse diagnosis. And then, if that is ruled out, that first initial child abuse by the targeted parent, then the automatic differential diagnosis becomes a factitious attachment pathology imposed on the child. And so we shouldn't be waiting 3 years or 2 years to make a diagnosis of the factitious disorder. We should be more proactive in anticipating that possibility. And your first rule out is a child abuse by the targeted parent. Fine. But if there's no child abuse there, then you can look to the factitious disorder. And because if it takes us too long to diagnose it, the entire time that child is with an abusive parent. And psychological abuse destroys the child from the inside out. And so we don't want to be leaving the child with an abusive parent for years. In addition, it becomes much, much harder to treat child abuse that is extended across years than it does if we get a handle on it early. If, in addition, you're responding with like concern or supervised visitation or restricting the allied parent or the targeted parent's time with the child, you are communicating to the child that society believes the targeted parent is abusive range. That's creating the false attachment pathology. That's creating the shared delusional disorder. You've been manipulated by the pathological parent, creating the false attachment pathology. So we have to do that. If there's abuse concerns, we have to make sure that it's not authentic abuse. So we will respond with a child protection evaluation of the situation. When you got severe attachment pathology, holy cow, what's going on? Um, but if there's no there, uh, then we need to move it over relatively quickly over to the making the diagnosis of the factitious attachment pathology, the shared persecutory delusion. But both of those wind up either one or both, and typically they'll both be, it is both, um, will wind up at the diagnosis of child psychological abuse. And that's the critical diagnosis for treatment. If we got abusive parent, we need to protect the child. We then separate the child from the abusive parent, restore the child's healthy normal range development, and then restore contact with the abusive parent with enough safeguards in place to make sure the abuse doesn't resume. That's what we do with child abuse. When I have severe attachment pathology, I know I've got child abuse somewhere. It's either from the targeted parent, which is would be then an authentic attachment pathology at a severe level, disorganized attachment kind of thing, or we have a factitious disorder imposed on the child, yeah, and shared persecutory delusion, induced persecutory delusion, which is child psychological abuse by that parent. So, in all of these cases, these custody cases, we should be coming out with a child abuse diagnosis, one way or the other. When you have a child rejecting a parent, that doesn't happen in the attachment networks, except maybe under child abuse range things. So if it's not, it's either a real or it's a factitious um, uh, situation, pathology in the family courts. So with that, I'm going to wrap up my discussion of the factitious disorder imposed on another in the family courts. The if you've ever seen those vases, or that optical illusion with the vase and the two women's faces, it's the factitious disorder is like that white space in the middle. It's the absence of a cause to the pathology. The persecutory delusion is like those women on the other side, the shared persecutory. There's a substance there that you can diagnose. That's a fixed and false belief, a delusion, that the child is being malevolently treated in some way. So that's what you're going to look for is whether or not the child has a belief, a fixed and false belief, the child is being malevolently treated in some way by the normal range parenting of the targeted parent. And then does the allied parent share that belief? Yes, then we have a shared persecutory delusion. And then if you know about the attachment system, you can look and see that there's a false attachment pathology here. And all of this, the diagnosis by rule out for a factitious disorder or establishing the false belief relative to the persecutory delusion, that's where I recommend documenting the parenting practices of the targeted parent using the parenting practices rating scale. Level one, level two are abusive range, level three and level four are normal range. Document the clinical impressions of the mental health people. Where do you rate that parent, the targeted parent's parenting? Level one, two, three, or four, and kind of get specific on it. That will allow us to then either agree with it, challenge it, but we got clarity on where you see their parenting. But also, if they are level three or four, they can't be producing the rejection. They can't be producing that's your rule out. If they're level one or two, then that's abusive range parenting. You've documented what the abusive range is, and then you put it on a treatment plan. You fix the abusive parenting, and that will fix the attachment pathology because the authentic attachment system is a goal corrected motivational system. It will always try to maintain the goal of forming an attachment bond. When there's a barrier, such as child abuse or really problematic parenting, the child changes how they try to bond to that parent, but they never stop trying to bond to that parent. If you see a child with a motivation to sever the parent child bond, that's not how the attachment system works. Then you won't see that ever, ever. You might see that in the severe child abuse pathology, in which case the child abuse is going to be evident. If you do an assessment, you're going to get reports a child's being beaten with electrical cords or was sexually abused by the parent or somebody. You'll get the confirmation that there's abusive parenting there. So with that, I'm going to wrap up this Sunday's coffee with Dr. Childress on factitious disorders imposed on another. The level of incompetence in the mental health professionals is phenomenal. The forensic psychologists are the worst imaginable. The clinical psychologists have abandoned you. They don't come back to the family courts. And even if they did come back, they wouldn't know the pathology in the family courts. And so you don't really have any competent mental health people. And because of that, the court's not getting the proper information out of professional psychology that the court needs to make its decisions about child protection. So it's an absolute mess over here because of 40 years of a failed experiment of forensic psychology and the abandonment of clinical psychology. So, professional psychology needs to step up to the plate, get over here, and start fixing things for the family courts because it is an abomination of what's happening in the family courts. So, with that, good luck, everybody, and take care.